Hello, and welcome to Tim's Reflections from Ohio, a YouTube video series where we talk about and reflect on parables and stories that Jesus told, as well as general stories from his life. This week, I want to read another story, and it's another one of these answer to prayer stories that I love. I've shared them. I shared a couple of them earlier. Answers to Prayer Part 1, Answers to Prayer Part 2. If you haven't viewed those videos, I encourage you to go back and view those so that you can be blessed by those, because they have some really powerful answer to prayer stories in each of those. And this one is exactly the same thing, and it will be Answers to Prayer Part 3, taken from a book, My Favorite Angel Stories by a man named Joe L. Wheeler. And this story is called The Turning Point. And the little introduction at the top here, it says, it was beginning to look like disaster for the 17-year-old boy, unwanted at home, out of money, and stranded in the Trinity Alps. What should he do? The story goes, my father, Durwood Palmer, was one of the most fascinating men I ever met. Contractor, builder, brick mason, missionary, teacher, musician, raconteur, and irresistible funny man. Life in his vicinity was never boring. But it wasn't always so. His mother having died at his birth, he became a foster child. His foster brothers and sisters treated him as an unwelcome intruder. And his foster father not only made him feel unwelcome, he pointed to a nearby pile of scrap lumber and told him to build a shed for himself in the backyard and live there instead of in the house with the rest of the family. Picture this young man growing up like that. Foster father saying, there's a pile of scrap lumber there, build yourself a shed to live in instead of living in the house with the rest of the family. It's as though he attended church with his foster family. There was so much disconnect between what was preached from the pulpit and how he was treated by supposed Christians that Dad wanted no part of it. Loving music as he did and having a great ear for melody, hear a piece once and he could usually play it. He started playing in bars for the fun of it, as well as the small income it brought him. He started smoking as well. When about 17, he decided to go to the north central California to pick almonds during harvest time. While working in the almond orchards, he noticed a very old automobile. He made an offer for it, and the rancher accepted it. Working on it during off hours, by the time the almonds had all been picked, he'd managed to get the old car in working order so he'd have transportation to go home. But en route home, it didn't take him long to discover that his ancient jalopy had a rather disgusting habit of stopping dead in its tracks about every 20 or 30 miles for no obvious reason. In about 20 or 30 minutes, it would start up again whether he worked on it or not. Occasionally, he'd pick up a hitchhiker, but they'd each and all abandon him when the perverse auto would stop again in the middle of the road. One of the characteristic traits of my father was his keen eyesight. Because of it, he was able to see items such as tools and other odds and ends along the road that no one else would notice. Thus it was on this start and stop trip, he made an unforced stop to pick up what turned out to be a .22 caliber pistol. He quickly wrapped it up in a piece of cloth and placed it under the seat. The road being empty at the time, there were no witnesses. Another disgusting habit of his reluctant steed was that it got terrible gas mileage. Every time he filled it up, the gas disappeared so fast he eventually got out to see if there was a big hole in the gas tank. What filled him with ever more apprehension was that all of these stops at gas stations were draining his summer savings at an alarming rate. Eventually, he reached Redding and turned west on 299 toward his home in Eureka. As the cycle continued, constant dying of the car, cranking the engine, the older vintage autos had no starter on the dashboard. You had to get out, walk to the front of the car, and hand crank it until the engine caught fire, so to speak. Many were the hands and arms that were broken in those days when the crank backfired on you, and the constant need for more gas. It wasn't long as the car labored along climbing into the Trinity Alps before the inevitable happened. The car stopped once again, but this time there was no more money to buy gas with. And this was a good 30 years before credit cards came in and one could buy things without having the money to pay for them. So what to do now? His summer savings were gone. It was a lonely dirt road back then and very little traffic on it. He was far away from what paths for home and had no way to get there. For the first time in his life, he knew desperation. He now recalled what he'd been taught in his foster home, the power of prayer. Round and round, the contrasting thoughts churned in his head. His hurt at being unwanted and unappreciated versus what he'd learned about God. Finally, seeing no other alternative, there on the deserted, dusty road, he turned to God and prayed for help and forgiveness. Suddenly, he looked up and saw a horseman riding toward him. As the rider reached the stalled car, he drew rein and asked my father if he had a gun for sale. Startled, Dad replied, "Yes, I have a .22 caliber pistol." After looking it over, the horseman offered $50 for it. Dad agreed on the price. He'd have taken far less in his extremity. He reached in his pocket for the wallet, placed the $50 in it, and looked up to thank the rider. But there was no horse, no rider, and no gun. Yes, when he rechecked the wallet, there was the money the rider had given him. He shook his head in disbelief. He looked down at the road where the horse had stood during his dialogue with the rider. There were tracks leading up to the place where the horse had stopped, but there were no tracks leading away from there. Dad then thanked God for the miracle on his behalf, for making it possible for him to make it back to Eureka. He then walked and walked till he reached the gas station, borrowed a gas can, filled it, and was driven back by the gas station worker to the car, put the gas in the tank, drove to the gas station, filled the tank, and then drove the remaining 75 miles home. Dad never forgot how God sent an angel on horseback, sold a gun he hadn't had with him when he left the almond orchard to the angel who clearly didn't need it. Most importantly, that experience resulted in an instant rebuilding of Dad's shattered self-esteem. Though he was neither wanted nor loved at home, he was so important to the Creator of this world that he sent an angel to rescue him. For my father, that was the turning point of his life. I read that story years ago, and every so often I've read it. I've told that story in conversation so many times over the years. That story illustrates what I want us to think about today. And it doesn't matter what circumstances you find yourself in today. The mortgage payment's coming due and you don't have the money. The cupboard is empty and you don't have food to feed your kids. The medical bills are coming in from that unplanned, unexpected emergency surgery, and you don't have the money to pay them. No matter what's going on, the doctor just gave you a diagnosis of cancer or something equally serious. No matter what's going on in your life, God is there, just like he was there for this man in this story, this boy in this story at the time. He was there for him when he turned his heart to him and asked for God's forgiveness and his help. God answered by sending an angel on horseback. The gun was a miracle in itself that he saw the gun. And the angel asked, "Do you have a gun for sale?" And God will work miracles for us today. Obviously, this story happened several years ago, but God is still working miracles today. He's still answering prayers today. He's still there waiting for us to turn to him and ask him, "God, forgive me, help me, save me." Whatever it is, I have this bill and I don't have the money to pay it. God has promised that if we are faithful to him, he will take care of us. He will be there. He will hear our prayers. He will answer our prayers. The Bible tells us, Jesus said, your Father in heaven knows your needs before you ask them. He knows what we need. He's just waiting for us to say, "God, help me. I don't know what to do." He will be there and he'll work it out in his own way. He may not send an angel on horseback for you or for me, but he'll work it out in some way if we just trust and believe in him. That's it for the video today. I encourage you, no matter what you're going through now, no matter what that hurt or that pain or that fear or that worry or that concern, no matter what those things are, give it to God. Give it to him and let him work it out for us. We need to trust him. We need to take our hands off. We try to figure it out on our own, but we need to take our hands off and let him work. Give it to him and trust that he will take care of it. Again, that's it for the video today. Again, I encourage you, if you didn't watch those first two Answer to Prayer videos, part 1 and part 2, please go back and view them, because you will be blessed by those stories. And even if you've already seen them, refresh your memory with those stories. We need to think about these stories regularly where God has answered prayers in a miraculous and powerful way. We need to trust him. We need to think about these things. So if you've been blessed by the video today, please hit that thumbs up button. Again, I love reading those comments. And as always, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so that you'll receive notification of new videos in the future. Thank you again for viewing the video. Have a blessed week, and remember, as always, that God loves you. He loves you so much that he sent his son to die that horrible death on that cross for you. And he is still there in heaven waiting for you to turn your heart to him, to turn your thoughts to him, give up everything. Say, God, my life is yours. Work it out, and then just live for him with all your heart. Thank you again. Have a blessed week.